What's up, you freaking geniuses? So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to find the zeros of a function with imaginary solutions. All right, so let's start with this one right here. F of x is equal to 4x squared plus 20. Okay, so to find the zeros, we need to figure out what your x's are equal to when your function is equal to 0. So here we're going to say, instead of f of x, we're going to replace this with a big fat 0, and we're going to say that 0 is equal to 4x squared plus 20. All right, and then we're just going to solve for x. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do here is get rid of this 20 by subtracting 20 from both sides. So then 0 minus 20 is equal to negative 20. And I'm going to write it on this side over here, negative 20. And we're going to say that that's equal to 4x squared. Okay, all I did was flip the equation, right? So the x is on this side. Okay, the next thing we can do is get rid of this 4. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. So then we get that x squared is equal to negative 5, right? Negative 5. Okay, so to solve for x right here and get rid of this exponent, the 2, we need to take the square root of this side, and what we do to one side, we do to the other, right? And then on this side, the square root and the squared exponent, those cancel out. So then we're just left with x. So we get that x is equal to, and then remember when we're solving for a quadratic, we get two solutions, right? Plus or minus. And plus or minus what? Well, this right here, the square root of negative 5, right? So what is the square root of negative 5? Well, we obviously can't take the square root of a negative number, right? So we're going to have an imaginary number here. So the way that we're going to figure that out is, let's solve it over here. So what is the square root of negative 5? So the first thing you want to do is split up the number from the negative sign. And the way that you do that is just by rewriting it as the square root of 5 times negative 1. Okay, and then we're going to split each of these into their own radicals, into their own square roots. So we're going to say that this is the square root of 5 times the square root of negative 1. Okay, now what is the square root of 5? Well, 5 is prime, right? We can't break this down anymore unless you plugged it into your calculator. So we're just going to leave it as the square root of 5, right? Since we can't simplify that anymore. And then what's the square root of negative 1? That's equal to I. Okay, the definition of I, an imaginary number, is that it's equal to specifically negative 1, the square root of negative 1, right? I isn't equal to just the square root of any negative number, all right? It's specifically the square root of negative 1, okay? So since we have the square root of negative 1 right here, we can put our I, okay? So the square root of negative 5 is equal to root 5i, or the square root of 5 times I, all right? So then here for our final solution, we're gonna say that x is equal to plus or minus root 5i. Okay, so we obviously get two solutions, right? Positive root 5i and negative root 5i. All right, let's try one more. So here we have g of x is equal to negative 1/5 x squared minus 10. All right, so again, if we're trying to find the zeros, we just want to plug in a big fat 0 into our function for g of x right here. So we're going to say that 0 is equal to negative 1/5 x squared minus 10. All right, so now let's solve for x here. So the first thing we're going to do is get rid of this negative 10 by adding 10 to both sides, right? So then here we get that 10 is equal to negative 1/5 x squared. But again, I'm going to flip those around. So I'm going to write this part first. So I'm going to say negative 1/5 x squared is equal to positive 10. Okay, the next thing we can do is get rid of this fraction. And the way that you do that is just by multiplying by the reciprocal, right? So since here we have negative 1/5, the reciprocal of this would be negative 5 over 1, right? Or we could just write that as negative 5. Okay, so we're going to multiply this whole side by negative 5 and this whole side by negative 5, right? So then here, these cancel out. So then we're just left with x squared is equal to negative 50. All right, so then again, to solve for x and to get rid of this exponent, we'll just take the square root of that side and the square root of this side, right? So then on this side, those cancel out, and we're just left with x is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 50. Okay, and again, we can't take the square root of a negative number, right? So we're going to have an imaginary solution. So let's simplify this up here. So what is the square root of negative 50? All right, so again, the first thing you want to do is just separate the number from the negative sign, right? So we're going to say that this is equal to 50 times negative 1, and then we'll split those up, right? We'll say negative 50 times the square root of negative 1. Okay, now to simplify the square root of 50, you want to try and use a perfect square because it'll simplify your math. So 50 we can break down into 2 times 25, since 25 is a perfect square, right? So we're going to break that down into the square root of 2 times the square root of 25, right? And then here we have the square root of -1, which we know is equal to I, right? I. So we're going to multiply by I right there. Okay, so then here, let's see, the square root of 2, can't simplify that anymore. Square root of 25 is equal to 5, so times 5, and then times I, right? Now I'm going to write the whole number at the very front, so our final answer is going to be 5 root 2 times I. Okay, so the square root of -50 is equal to 5 root 2I. So that's what we're going to put here. So we're going to say 5 root 2I. All right, so once again, you get two solutions, right? So positive 5 root 2I and negative 5 root 2I. So if you found the video helpful, definitely leave a thumbs up down below. And if you have any other questions or want to see any other examples, just let me know in the comment section below.